Hi everyone, it's Joe here from Lawn Solutions Australia and welcome to this episode of Turf Talk, where again I'm joined by my colleague and resident turf expert, Simon Adermann. Simon, welcome.
Hey Joe, how you going? Good to be back.
Going good, thank you. Good to have you back. Now today, it's going to be a little bit of a sports turf episode for those that are interested. They might be in the industry themselves, or they might be just a residential turf user who wants that sports turf kind of look. So we're going to go through a bit of an overview about a couple of key varieties today that are very suited to the sports turf industry. The ones we'll focus on are TifTuf Hybrid Bermuda, Segrange Zoysia, and also Primo Zoysia, which is another one a lot of people may not know a lot about. But we'll start with TifTuf. So in a sports turf situation, why would TifTuf be a grass that people would want to put in and use?
I think, Joe, it's probably a new grass that's come to the market in the last 5 years, but what it's uniquely different is TifTuf has a stronger root system than any other Couch or Bermuda on the market. It has really good winter colour, and its playability or wearability is probably one thing that stands out in the market. In a sports field, traditionally things like wear, bare patches, goal mouse, centre squares, things like that are a real issue, especially when you get rain, where TifTuf has the ability to handle wear a lot better, but also probably in a sports field market, its ability to recover from wear. Yep. And I think that's pretty critical in a market. All grasses will wear, but its ability to recover. Yep. And that's been proven on the number of sports fields that's been put on. And really, I suppose it's a cost saving, whether it be a small sports field, a beachfront area, or a council recreational area, it saves money in the long term.
Yeah, and we've got a number of good case studies where that's very evident now with TifTuf in the sports turf world. So again, you can't avoid wear and tear on natural turf. It will happen, but the recoverability and the way a grass handles wear is really, really important. So we've seen a number of case studies now, a couple of stadiums around the place that have told the reduction in turf replacement that they have to do each year, which is down to the cultivar because they've got the same base, the same maintenance, everything else. So cultivars do make a difference. And Simon, you mentioned there, drought tolerance, wear tolerance, increased root density, that sort of stuff. This isn't stuff we're just saying. SGRI have actually done a trial with TifTuf up against 7 other couches that are
Seven
other
couches that are used in the marketplace, yeah.
Winter colour was a big one. Drought tolerance, wear tolerance, shade tolerance. All these things have been proven with this grass, which makes it such a wonderful grass for sports turf. Now, in the golf world, where does TifTuf fit for you when it comes to golf? I mean, Stadia is a no-brainer. It goes really well in Stadia. But the golf world, how's it suit there?
Look, I think there's a number of different applications in a golf course or a golf market. I think one is tees. Tees on a golf course get a lot of wear. You could have 100,000 rounds of golf a year and you're playing off tees. So they do cop a lot of wear, divots and things like that.
Yeah.
A grass is not going to have divots, but it's about its recovery. And I think that comes back to if a grass can establish and have a really strong, healthy root system, then its recovery rate's going to be quicker.
Yeah.
Probably the thing that's a little bit uniquely different about TifTuf Hybrid Bermuda than other grasses is in its breeding process, it has more gibberellic acid than any other grass, which allows it to recover quicker. It photosynthesizes quicker and the recovery is far better.
So what we see with this is when you go to high-end sports turf, whether that's high-end golf or whether that's high-end stadia, the grass variety probably becomes less relevant the higher you go up the chain in a way because they've got so much, they've got the extra money behind them, they've got the staff behind them, they've got the nutrient program, that sort of thing. But where it really finds its niche is in that middle range sort of stadia or golf course environment where its drought tolerance really shines because they may not have unlimited water like these top-end stadiums do. They may not have, an unlimited fertiliser budget like these top-end stadiums do. So what we've seen in sort of the suburban council grounds is TifTuf really shine. And we've seen it, whether it's up against other Couches or up against Kikuyu, the need for replacement is so little in these grounds now. And you think, I've been talking to turf farmers about this quite regularly, and it's actually been, in one way, TifTuf's been a negative for them because they used to get all this work replacing Kikuyu and wintergreen gold mouse every year, and they're just not getting it anymore because TifTuf's standing up so well. But it is a really, really good thing to see, and if you're in the sports turf market or you want that high-wearing sports turf look, TifTuf would probably be the grass for you. Now, We'll get into the maintenance requirements, the mowing requirements and that of each of these grasses a little bit later on. We'll just start with some overviews, and we'll move on to the first of our two zoysia products we're going to talk about today. And people may have heard of Segrange zoysia before on this podcast or in other mediums, but Segrange in Australia, when it comes to sports turf, is more suited to golf as opposed to stadia because it's a little bit slower growing. But what's your experience been like with Segrange in the golf course world?
I think, Joe, where Segrange is a perfect fit is a lot of grasses on the market today, say around bunker faces, cart paths and things like that, get very invasive.
Yep.
And then it's very labour intensive for the superintendent staff to come around and make sure bunkers are clean the roots out, things like that. Where zoysia can save, or Segrange zoysia can save a lot of time on maintenance, where it can be put into somewhere else on the golf course.
Yep.
Probably on a tee surface as well. We spoke before about TifTuf. It can handle a wear and it recovers quick. Where Segrange, because of its stolons and its thatch and everything, it's a very tightly knitted grass. It can help eliminate divot marks on a tee.
Yeah.
So there's things like that. It's also very shade tolerant once it's established. And then so golf courses are, obviously a lot of trees around, a lot of shade. So it does fit that market there where it's shade tolerant. It can handle where other grasses, whether it be kikuyu or couch, aren't as shade tolerant.
Yeah.
So there is a real fit in there. But I think tees, bunkers and approaches to greens. So where you would have a green, whether it be bent grass or couch grass on the green, you can then do your green surrounds with Segrange zoysia. It can really differentiate or define the area around the green.
Yeah, and we've seen it time and time again at clubs like Catalina Golf Club, Kalara in Sydney, and also Noosa Golf Club, for example, Sunshine Coast. Where it's perfect for tee boxes and green surrounds and bunker surrounds is zoysia grass has a high silicon content. So it's got a very very stiff leaf. I know we get a lot of feedback by farms. They say we have to make sure we have really sharp mower blades when we're cutting zoysia grass. But where that's good in golf is it's good for the ball eye because it doesn't sit down in the thatch like it does in couch. So the need to take a divot is greatly minimised. And I was watching a video once with Phil Mickelson talking about, golf's a science for these guys, but talking about grass types. And he actually says with zoysia grass, it makes you swing your club totally different because the ball sits prouder on zoysia grass. So the need to take a divot is less. So it's crazy how it makes such a difference at that end of golf where they really, really notice it. But the other good thing I'll talk about, with Segrange in golf is versatility when it comes to mowing. You've seen it before where they keep the tee boxes, for example, shorter, and they let the grass surrounding the tee boxes, which golfers, they shouldn't be hitting off, but if they duff their drive, they might have to. But they leave it a little bit longer, and that seems to have a pretty good effect.
Segrange is pretty unique, and it's probably the way it grows. It can be mowed right down to probably 5 mil, and then it can be left unmown. So really, I suppose you can define tees around the sides of tees where it can be longer. You can do it on fairways and roughs, things like that. So it's a grass that you can have one grass that can do a number of jobs. Where before you couldn't have a couch fairway and then have couch at 60, 70, 80 mil unmown. It's just unmanageable. Where Segrange, you can do that. So it's unique in what it can do. You mentioned before about the ball sitting up, and that's probably one of its biggest attributes is Segrange is vertical.
Going straight up.
And it sits on top. So again, you mentioned the swing. Your swing is totally different. You're not hitting under the ball to get it out. You're hitting the ball itself. So there's a number of attributes. I think the biggest thing is people accepting change to a new variety of grass. I remember Kalara Golf Club some 5 years ago. Segrange was very new, and we put some Segrange in there with the superintendent Ryan at the time and put it in places that no grass would ever grow. There was tees, there was cart paths on the edge of cart paths, and that probably over a 2 or 3 year period saved so much time, labour, replacement turf, and then probably on top of that, a lot of oversowing. So come winter, they used to have to oversow with ryegrass to have grass coverage. None of that had to happen. So that's probably the versatility of Sagrange in that situation.
And there's another example out there, a very well-known 9-hole golf course now, which is Tevan Valley Golf Club, and Paul Gumbleton's done such a wonderful job there, where he's almost wall-to-wall Sagrange zoysia. The fairways are Sagrange, the surrounds, the tee boxes are Sagrange, and what he does is he treats it totally differently. He treats it from an environmental point of view, where one of the beauties about zoysia grass is you can run it as lean as possible. Like, he basically doesn't fertilise. He gets his colour from pigments when he needs it. But the good thing about zoysia grass is it's got such a low fertility requirement. You can starve any grass and let it go and it'll be there, but the surface isn't it's not together, it's not dense, where Sagrange doesn't seem to lose its density even if you back the fertiliser right off. So he runs a very interesting golf course there where, it can look discoloured at times, but it doesn't matter because the playability is so good. So that's another interesting thing about zoysia grass that not a lot of people know, is you can scale it right back and it'll still be fine. And just touching back on the point you raised before about the versatility in Sagrange mowing height, that's transferring to the garden now too. We've seen a lot of people recently with unmown zoysia in their gardens, which is pretty cool to see as well.
It's very different, and I think probably one thing when we brought Sagrange into Australia, it was never on our radar. It's something we've learned as this grass has developed in the marketplace, and the different things that it can do in the marketplace. So unmown is unreal. You can leave it there unmown, period. You don't have to do anything. Or if you want to, you can get a whippersnapper or a mower and knock it down and bring it back to a height and allow it to come back up. So what it does, I suppose, the aesthetics of it, it looks wispy, it looks natural. It's a look that's probably really unusual.
Yeah.
And people like it. And I suppose not everyone is a lawn fanatic and wants to have a beautiful yard that's mown and nice and trim. But if you even put Sagrange in and didn't mow it for 12 months, your yard wouldn't look out of place.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Where if you had any other grass, your neighbours would be probably trying to evict you.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? It looks good. It looks authentic, I suppose, is the word.
It gets long, but it's never untidy.
Yeah.
Another thing with Sagrange, which I think is worth touching on in the commercial world, is how it can change parklands and kids' play areas and that sort of stuff. So what we've seen lately is some horrible experiences councils and the like around the Sydney area having with mulch and asbestos found in mulch. What we've seen with Sagrange is what we were speaking to before about leaving it unmown, is you can not leave it unmown necessarily, but mow it semi-regularly. Like, I'm talking 4 times a year, 6 times a year, twice a year, whatever you want to do on the highest setting on a mower. And you can use zoysia grass as a soft fall in a way. So what they're doing now is they're either using bark or mulch, which blows away, it gets messy, it obviously can have some contamination issues, which we've seen, or they use soft fall, which is that rubbery synthetic matting that they put on a lot of playgrounds now. That gets really, really hot in summer. I know it's at our local park here, and you can't even walk on the stuff in summer. So what people are starting to use now is actually use Sagrange zoysia in these situations, and it's a totally different look and feel. It doesn't suit absolutely everywhere, but it can go on a swing sets, it can go on pump tracks like we've seen, it can go in and around kids' play equipment, and they don't have to mow it every week. They can mow it twice a year if they want to, but because of the slow-growing nature of Sagrange, they can get a wonderful-looking surface. And I'll talk to pump tracks for a second. You've seen the pump track local to us here in Berry that have used Sagrange and the wonderful things that it's done there. So it's definitely an option for people to consider.
I think, go back to the pump track, I think probably there's a couple of options there. Obviously, it's natural grass, and I think people automatically get a buzz out of natural grass.
Yeah.
When you see natural grass, you see it growing, it's not really low, it's wispy, it looks great around a pump track. But I think also around that pump track, I've seen the mounds and the risers, you can't mow it. It's not safe for people to go and mow. So I think in that situation, you're eliminating an issue or a safety aspect with people coming to mow it. But it's also good, it's environmentally friendly, families like it, they can sit on it, all of those types of things. You mentioned before about swings and things like that. Bark, rubber, all of those things has an environmental impact. Whether it blows away, washes away or whatever. Having natural grass, it stabilises the soil that's there. You don't cause big ruts. You don't have mud and water, ponding water from rain. So you're going to have grass. The versatility of Sagrange is it can be treated at any height.
Yeah.
So you can manage the height. If you've got high wear coming into a swing area and 50 children, you're going to have it as high as you possibly can that's safe, because it's going to handle that wear. If you've only got a family of 4 children, you can keep the height lower, but you can still have even coverage. So there's no set height you have to mow it at, or don't have to mow it, or whatever. You manage it as the wear or volume of wear it gets.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it's definitely something worth considering, and we've seen it's getting more and more popular as people start to try and start to use it, because the other thing to it as well is it cools down these environments so much. I mentioned how hot softball and how hot bark can get in the middle of summer. Grass cools, grass doesn't heat up, so I think it's something definitely worth considering. Just away from Segrange, but staying on Zoysia. Now, this is one that it's not as readily available as TifTuf and Segrange are around, but Primo Zoysia is another Zoysia Matrella grass. It and Segrange are both Matrellas, which is a type of Zoysia grass from the Zoysia family. So where's Primo a little bit different to, say, a Zoysia grass like Segrange?
Well, I think Primo is more developed for greens, whether it be a golf green or a bowling green, whatever. So a lot finer leaf. It can be mowed a lot lower. It's got a little bit less thatch in it. You spoke before about fertility. Primo can have even less fertility than Segrange. Probably my background from years ago when I was greenkeeping, we used to have TifTuf on the bowling greens, and then how fine it was, but it used to build up a fair bit of thatch.
Right.
And probably what I've seen with Primo Zoysia is it's really suited to bowling greens. And again, there's probably, I don't know, off the top of my head, there's probably 250, 300 bowling clubs around Australia. The biggest issue is they have to renovate every year. TifTuf's a great grass, but it does wear, does build up thatch. There is an opportunity in bowling clubs to convert greens to Primo Zoysia. And I suppose the ability or the advantage to bowling clubs these days is low nutrition, money saving, more wear, you can have more players on it, things like that. Yeah. So there is a couple of bowling greens that are starting to change over. One is Brooms Head in northern New South Wales, and then in January of 25 there's a bowling club in Brisbane, New Farm Bowling Club, that is taking a TifTuf green out and planting it with Primo.
The other good thing at greens cut height, like what is a bowling green mown at? Like,
look, don't laugh at me. I'll tell you my age, but we used to cut them at the thickness of a 10-cent piece.
Yeah, right.
So that's what we used to talk in, thickness. So you would bring a green back from renovation and you'd start cutting it at 40 cents. So that's two 20-cent pieces together. then you'd bring it back to 20 cents. And then we would cut bowling greens sometimes. If we wanted speed, we'd cut them at a thickness of a 5-cent piece.
Yeah, right.
So that's how we used to set the height gauge. So, you're probably cutting a bowling green potentially at 2 mil.
You wouldn't be able to do it anymore. No one carries coins. But with
credit card, Joe.
Credit card. With shortcut grass, so disease pressures obviously increase quite a lot. I know bowling greens and golf greens suffer a lot with disease. Now, where Zoysia stands out is the origins of Zoysia grass comes from Southeast Asia. Very hot, very humid, a lot of cloud cover, a lot of disease pressure, and these grasses are bred out of that environment, so they're bred for disease resistance. We've seen that in Zoysia grass, particularly up against couch grass at shortcut heights, haven't we?
We have, and I think it comes back, you just said a lot of things there, shade, humidity, all of those, but I think one main thing for disease is probably fertility. So on a TifTuf bowling green, and probably put this into golf as well, is because they're so short, when you cut grass really short, it shortens up the root system.
Right.
So then you've got to feed or fertilise more. So when you're fertilising, you're putting higher nitrogen into them. So then when you get humidity and shade and a bit of wet weather, disease just runs rampant.
Makes that problem even worse, yeah.
Where Zoysia is different is it's very low fertility, so you're not putting that extra nitrogen in. You're not doing all that. But at the same token, Zoysia has a very deep root system.
Right.
So its ability to withhandle that, withhandle disease is because of the shade. It can handle shade, cloud, moisture, but low fertility, and that really helps. So there's a saving there as well on chemicals and things like that.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I know how much let's take a golf course, for example. greens grass is such a small amount area-wise, but such a big bit budget-wise. So it makes a lot of sense. So if you're thinking about changing your greens grade turf over, I'd definitely put zoysia in the consideration bracket for that. And just on each of these varieties, that was a bit of an overview for everyone. But we're going to talk inputs now and just sort of give an overview about how each of these grasses differ when it comes to inputs. And we'll start with irrigation. Now, TifTuf and zoysia grasses are probably during establishment, they're on the different end of the spectrum when it comes to irrigation. TifTuf, as you're probably aware, people listening to this are aware, has excellent drought tolerance. Always has done. Couch grasses by nature have good drought tolerance. TifTuf's just an exceptional example of that. And irrigate to establish, but the establishment period can be a couple of weeks, really, with TifTuf, can't it? Where zoysia grass, it takes a lot longer, so the irrigation cycle must go for longer to get it to establishment. But initially, deep watering is probably key with zoysia grass in the first couple of weeks, wouldn't it?
Look, I think it's essential. Zoysia grass, as we've spoken, has a fantastic root system, but it's all about the speed from when you lay it or whatever to get that grass through the soil profile into the existing profile that you're planting it on. Yeah. Water is critical, and I think probably in the first 2 weeks of planting zoysia, that grass needs to be watered every couple of hours. Get it down. The faster you get that root established, the better your long term is going to be.
Yeah.
I think what happens is zoysia looks fantastic on a pallet when it's delivered, and I think people see it and they lay it and they go, "This is a fantastic looking lawn or tee," and then back off the water because they think it looks so good.
Yeah.
That's probably where I think there's a fault. They've got to maintain and water it extensively for the first couple of weeks until they see those roots. Once they see the roots starting to go down, you're right, you've got through that critical period.
Because the issue, slow growing is a great trait, but the issue with it is if you stuff up that initial installation period, getting it back can be a nightmare. TifTuf's totally different. Obviously, don't want you to stuff up that installation period. Initially, we want you to water it like you would any other grass and get it to put its roots down. But we've seen TifTuf, have root initiation after 4 days. I know one of our co-workers here, Mick Sutton, who used to work at Campbelltown Stadium, he mowed it after 6 days or something on the stadium. So there's a massive difference when it comes to that. Yeah. We've already sort of spoke about drought tolerance, but let's just move on to mowing. Now, again, mowing requirements between zoysia grass and couch grasses like TifTuf are totally, totally different. Like TifTuf in the stadia world, if you're at, say, 14-ish mil, you want to be mowing fairly regularly, where the idea of zoysia grass is you can achieve that same look by mowing less. I mean, if you've got zoysia at 3-4 mil, like primo zoysia at 3 or 4 mil, it'll still need, bi-weekly cutting, not daily cutting like some of the couch grasses need at that height, but bi-weekly cutting. But I guess the goal here from a golf or sports turf view with zoysia grass is because they're mowing so much grass, if they can take one mow out a fortnight or one mow out a week, the cost saving would be huge.
It's massive. Probably just move back a tab. So couch and zoysia, if we're going to compare them with mowing, are totally, as you said, two different grasses. On a stadium or on a sports turf surface, there's a couple of things to think about. The more a grass gets mowed, the tighter it's going to be.
Yep.
And it's pretty critical in sports turf to have a really tight surface. You get a really tight surface, you got less chance of divots, foot marks, things like that.
Yep.
But I think with couch, you've got to manage it. So TifTuf, the management of it is totally different to any other couch. Because it has more gibberellic acid in it, it'll grow a lot quicker, but it'll also grow a lot more vertically to tighten it up. So the more you mow, the tighter the surface is going to get.
Yeah.
The tighter the surface gets, the more ability you have for the roots to go down and establish even more.
Yeah.
What needs to happen probably, or what happens in a sports turf situation is, if you miss 2 or 3 days in a critical growing period, you can really put yourself backwards. So I think mowing's super critical in the growing season. Less fertility, more mowing, but also there's other products out on the market today that you can control grass, things like that.
Yep.
So
PGR is definitely one of those to consider for that.
It's something that's probably needs to be brought into the management practice as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Where zoysias are totally different. you water them, you get them really established, you back off any fertility, and look, your clip yield is totally different. Is there a downside to all of this? Probably there is. Nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
Sometimes you mentioned before, zoysia grass has a fair bit of silica in it. It can be pretty abrasive on mowers, and then probably more sharpening has to take place.
Yeah.
Nothing worse mowing a surface with a blunt mower. It just doesn't do any justice to the grass. But I learned something probably when I was in Asia with Brad Burgess, and I think probably the advantage of getting minds together and discussing things is if you're going to mow zoysia with a cylinder mower, always put some water on it first.
Okay.
And mow it with a damp leaf.
Yep.
And it really stops that abrasiveness.
Yeah, right.
And lubricates the cylinder, and long term the cut's a lot better and less sharpening and that. So they're just little things you learn by as you're going along talking to people.
That's a great tip there for anyone mowing zoysia grass. And another issue that creeps into high-end stadia, but every golf course, is shade. So generally in stadia, community sports ground, that shade just isn't an issue because they're out in the open, but every golf course deals with shade. High-end sports turf, I mean, you look at Suncorp and the amount of sunlight that stadium allows in is very little. We've been to, lucky enough to be to a couple of stadiums in the UK. Twickenham is a great example of that. It's that same sort of small opening on top, and they counteract that on the high end with, grow lights. In the US, they put it on a movable table and they drag the grass surface out of the stadium, so they curate it in full sun and then push it back into the stadium. But the importance of shade tolerance, let's just focus on golf for this. Now, that's where zoysia grass can really stand out for a golf course, because what they can get is they can get tee box cut heights, even greens cut heights, surround cut heights in grasses that can handle the shade as well, which isn't true for cooch and kikuyu when they want to get that nice low cut. So that's why zoysia grasses are very beneficial for the golf world as well.
Probably going back to what we touched on before, zoysia with cloud cover and shade is unreal.
Yep.
You don't lose colour. It still stands vertically upright. It can handle it. Probably kikuyu and cooch in that shade just gets really leggy, opens up, and then there's more chance of getting divots, water movement, and moss and things like that. Where zoysia maintains that thatch level, it maintains the upright growth, and it can handle shade. So I think probably what we underestimate in zoysia grasses is people put them down and say it didn't handle shade. The problem it didn't handle shade was it wasn't established enough.
Yeah.
So you keep coming back to that first thing, establishment, getting the root system down, and then its ability to handle shade is probably the best grass in the world for that environment.
Yeah, sure.
But it's critical, that establishment.
Absolutely, and that goes for anyone putting zoysia grass in, whether that's golf or whether it's a home lawn. Establishment is the number one thing you have to consider. Just onto sports turf, I guess, issues faced by sports turf curators that turf can help to alleviate, but turf is also part of that problem because it does suffer a lot from excessive wear, not enough sunlight and that sort of thing. So what's going on at the moment in the sports turf world is we have to, that's why we're bringing these new turf cultivars out. That's why companies, fertiliser and chemical companies, are bringing all these wonderful new products out, is we have to change our way of thinking because traffic on these venues is just going up and up and up. I know just in the increase in women's participation in sports like AFL, in sports like OzTag, in sports like rugby league, in sports like soccer, it is putting double, triple the amount of pressure on that same sports turf surface that are just getting worn and worn and worn. What impact does that excess wear have on natural turf cultivars that probably aren't looked after properly?
Look, I think you can have the best grass in the world. We can do as much research as we want and have a grass that will handle wear and do all that, limited water use, all of that sort of stuff. But unless you prepare a profile or a subsoil surface, you're going to have issues.
Yeah.
So I think the most important thing is working with the right soil, whether it be an organic-based soil, whether it be a sand profile, whether it have drainage or whatever. You've got to have the right soil profile. And if you put the right grass on that soil profile, you're going to manage the wear.
Yeah.
If you have a soil profile that is full of clay, that doesn't drain or anything, you're going to have issues.
Yeah.
So I think people blame the grass because they see it, visually see it. They don't understand what's underneath and they can't see it. But I think what you've got to do is manage the soil profile, put the grass on, and then manage your wear. So when you manage your wear, then you've got to aerate to allow oxygen into that profile. You have to then replace high wear with nutrients to get recovery.
Yeah.
So it's not just using the best grass in the world. You've got to put a few other things around that to make that grass perform like the best grass in the world. There's
actually a video on YouTube that Mick Badham, a well-renowned soil scientist in our industry and someone that we've worked with before, has put together, and it's Middlehead Oval in Sydney, and he talks exactly about what you've just said. So they were going to replace Middlehead Oval with artificial turf because there was just too much traffic on this oval. Right. They redid it. Mick incorporated organics and built a proper soil profile. That field's looked as good as it's ever looked, just because he changed to a better turf cultivar as well, but he changed that soil profile to incorporate organics, and it wasn't just the site soil that was there. So it makes such a massive difference. So they're two really good ways that you've just mentioned: improve your soil type and improve your turf type, and it'll go a long way to helping natural turf handle this excess wear. How they do it in high-end stadia is a little bit different. They have a thing which they call hybrid turf, or a hybrid turf system. Do you want to go through a little bit about what's involved with hybrid turf?
I think, Joe, there's a number of different hybrid systems out there, but why they use it, without talking about what systems, but why they use it is the hybrid system has fibres that go into the soil that help bind the soil together. Mm-hmm. So as the roots go down, the turf gets laid, roots go down, the roots go into the fibres, and then the fibres all lock together.
Yep.
And that helps bind the surface and the soil profile together to stop movement, stop divots, things like that. So there is a number of different ones, but there's also now a system where they actually stitch artificial grass into the surface. Mm-hmm. So what it does there, it helps then eliminate wear. So instead of a fully open natural turf surface, you can then stitch in artificial grass into to help the wear. But you're not getting rid of the natural grass. So all it is, it assists it, and that could work then in grandstand shade, high wear areas, things like that.
Yeah. So what will happen then if the natural turf ever wears out, it'll still appear green because it's got the synthetic stitching through it? Is that kind of what the...
That's basically what happens. Yeah. Instead of having a bare patch,
yeah,
you will still see green. You're probably too young to remember this, but back in the 80s, and the State of Origin is a classic. You go back and watch some of the State of Origin games from years ago, Sydney and Brisbane stadiums, they're playing games in the wet weather, and those fields were just dirt.
Yeah.
They were just slop and dirt. You don't see that today.
You never see a muddy jersey.
And that's what happens today is we talk about improved varieties, different soil profiles, but you see this is what's happened over the period of time.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore. Mm. So management, improved grass varieties, all of these things have improved over a 25, 30, 40-year process. That's where we are today. A game would never be allowed to be played on those surfaces today.
Even community sport, they're starting to accept it even less and less. When even when I was younger, it used to be part of life playing in the mud, but now it seems to be not accepted anymore. So things are changing, and it's for the better, I think.
Oh, it's unreal. Like just little things. Like I've been involved just recently in Brisbane with dog off leash areas. Now, who would have thought that a local government has the pressure to make sure there's full grass coverage in a dog off leash area? Yeah. So these are the pressures that's getting put on turf producers, researchers like us, bringing the best turf grasses to the market. There's so much around that we have to cater for now.
Yeah. Moving on to facility-specific considerations, I guess we'll say. So what has to be considered from a turf point of view when it comes to different types of sporting venues? Because they're all quite different. Even though they're in the same category, they're all quite different. So we'll start with the one where you've probably had the most experience, which is lawn bowls. What are the keys to a good surface in bowls? Is it consistency above everything, is it? Or what's the key there?
Believe it or not, it's been level.
Yeah, right.
So when you're playing lawn bowls, you've got, a 1,500 square metre bowling green. You can't play on it if it's not level. So probably the biggest pressure from a greenkeeper's point of view is having a level surface.
Yeah, right.
So that's probably number one. Having full grass coverage is number two. It's very difficult to play bowls when you're roller bowl, it goes across grass and then it hits dirt, so it'll go off on a different angle, things like that. But probably the most critical thing is managing thatch.
Okay.
The surface has to be even, managing the thatch all the way through it and having an even grass cover.
Yeah.
Is probably the most difficult thing. I used to love when I was greenkeeping winter, so as soon as the greens would go dormant in April, May, it was like holiday period for 4 months of the year. It was great. You'd mow the greens once every 2 weeks, you'd roll them. But you do all your work on a bowling green in spring, you renovate, get it level, do all that work, and then you set you up for the rest of the year. But managing your thatch and the evenness of the surface is probably the most critical thing.
See, we'll go from a surface like a lawn bowling rink, what you just spoke about there, where every bit of grass across the whole rink has to be totally uniform, to a situation like a cricket ground, even a high level cricket ground, a suburban cricket ground. Now, we were lucky enough recently to go to Lords, and Lords is the home of cricket. It's an unreal venue, and the team there do a wonderful job in keeping that pitch and outfield in such good condition. But where it was funny to see is, different to what you've just said, is the wicket is everything. The wicket and the square that surrounds the wicket is everything. The outfield out there, look, it had a bit of power in it. It had a few different turf types, but as long as it mowed up and looked good, it didn't have to handle constant wear and tear like a football field would. It didn't have to be totally uniform like a bowling rink would. Mind you, it was very, very good, and most cricket fields are, but everything's about the wicket. So it's kind of like the golf green situation for the golf course. So much inputs go into such a small surface area. We're talking, 1/100th of what the total area is, and it would be 80% of their budget, I'd imagine. Now, cricket wickets are a little bit different because they use a totally different soil profile. Historically, they use bulleye soil, I believe.
There's a number of, obviously, suppliers around Australia, but it's a very heavy black soil with a clay content.
Yeah.
So it's all about compaction.
Yeah, right.
So basically how a cricket wicket works, and I was fortunate enough years ago when I was greenkeeping on a bowling green, I looked after cricket wickets for 2 years.
Oh, yeah.
For the Redlands Cricket Club. And it was quite interesting how it works. So your black soil, every Wednesday you irrigate and it swells up. So your black soil goes from being cracked and worn from the weekend to swelling up. It was unbelievable how much it would rise. And then you have to then manage it when it's dry enough to get a roller on, then bring the compaction back down. So it's all about compacting and getting a hard surface, and it's all about ball bounce. So trying to grow grass on dark soil that's full of clay that you've got to dry out every week, then water it and dry out. The grass's ability, it's so hard, it's limited.
Yeah.
You're never going to have a root system to manage it. So that's why you see cricket wickets all around the batting crease and the bowling, they're always worn.
Yeah.
There's high wear, but you can't establish, doesn't matter what grass you put on there, you're never going to have a uniform pitch.
Out of all the turf curating jobs in the world, the person who has to manage a 22-yard long surface has probably got more work than anyone.
More work than anyone.
Because it's so focused on that wicket too, and they're one day away, or one mow too much, or one mow not enough from having a really good pitch to having a really bad pitch. So just one more I want to talk about, football grounds, whether it's rugby league, rugby union, AFL or soccer, but the one thing that stands out for me from what I've heard doing this podcast, especially from someone like Matt Oliver, who does Suncorp Stadium, the requirements that soccer or football needs as compared to a rugby league venue is so different, because you forget about this. You think it's just a ground they're going to play a sport on, but I know he talks about in the podcast, you should listen to it if you haven't already, and it's the Women's World Cup, and it's all about they have to be at 10 mil or whatever it is, and there can't be a blade of grass out of place. They've got to have certain ball roll. He's got to water the pitch a certain amount just before they run out, because there needs to be a certain moisture level. It's a fine art compared to just preparing a football ground, so it's something they've got to be a lot more onto to keep it looking good. Just one more point before we sort of wrap it up. Now, we spoke a little bit before about advances in turf technology and where that's gone, and I think Lawn Solutions has been a massive part of that in the Australian turf industry over the last 10 years or so. And if you haven't already, we've done a podcast with Dr. Ambika Chandra, Dr. Brian Schwartz, who breed these new turf grasses, and what we've seen and what we spoke about has shown that improvements in turf cultivars make such a difference to our sporting venues, whether that's high-end or whether that's suburban grounds or whatever it is. But it's not just turf, it's not just soil, it's innovation in products. What have you seen over your sort of experiences, the key innovations when it comes to, say, fertiliser that we're seeing now that are helping a lot with these issues?
I was probably fortunate enough to go through an era of change. When I first started greenkeeping and on bowling greens initially, there was never any slow-release fertiliser. It was always upfront fertiliser. So we used to use things like, and you can't buy it now, but a product called Nitram, which was straight nitrogen.
Right.
Then we went to ureas, and we used to mix all our fertilisers ourselves. So you'd buy urea, you'd buy potash, you'd buy phosphorus, you'd mix it all together. So things like that we used to do. Then we got innovative and went to a soluble fertiliser that wasn't slow release. So you buy it, dissolve it, and spray it out.
Right.
So your granular fertiliser was urea-based. That was all. Then I think back in the 80s, a company called Scott's came to Australia with a methylene urea, this slow-release urea, and that was going to change the world. And it did. So all it did was, instead of putting upfront nitrogen on, getting all this growth, then it would drop off and you get no growth. It controls the growth.
Yeah.
It was called, I still remember it was called a feast or a famine. So you would feed urea here, it'd go like that, then go like that, up like that the whole time. And what the key secret with nutrition is now is when you fertilise is keeping a stable line, keeping that nutrition level here and keep it uniform.
Yeah.
That was probably the biggest change I saw in managing turf.
And would compound fertilisers come into that after that, would they, where they've got all the nutrients in the one prill?
Compound was always there, but
Okay.
I think they were used more in agriculture and horticulture.
Right.
Where you had a compound, nitrogen, NP and K, all in the one prill.
Yeah.
They ventured into the turf industry, but they were never a really small, fine prill. They were always quite a large prill.
Yeah, right.
And sometimes in those days, took a bit of time to dissolve.
Yeah.
But slow release fertiliser did change the market.
Yeah. No. Slow release fertiliser, and then even now we're getting into pre-emergent, whether that's pest or weed control, and some of the products coming through there are unbelievable. Let's talk just quickly on a product called a Celiprin, GrubGuard Ultimate, where it's an insecticide with no PPE requirements at all and no re-entry period. So you can spread an insecticide out that gives 6 months control against grubs without using any protective equipment, and while your dogs are basically running around there at the same time. Like, it's pretty cool where all this stuff's going.
Again, I was pretty fortunate in my time in the turf industry. I was part of a project group that released a Celiprin to the Australian market, and that product came to the Australian market from a company called DuPont. And then over a period of time, it was tested and trialled, and then we released it to the Australian market. We did a roadshow that took us about 6 weeks all around Australia. Then we took that roadshow to New Zealand and did all of New Zealand. And that was an innovative product, an insecticide that had, no chemical rating, no scheduling, no re-entry period. It changed the industry. I suppose what you mentioned before was pre-emergent. It was like this in an insecticide. Pre-emergence changed the industry, as in you're stopping weeds germinating instead of getting rid of them.
Yeah.
This is what a Celiprin did. You're stopping insects, and then instead of trying to get rid of them when they were there.
Yeah.
So it was really innovative in changing the whole industry.
You always tell stories that I never know you had anything to do with, stuff like that, but there you go. It's always good to learn and good to hear. Thanks for chatting with us today again, Simon. It's always good to have you on the podcast. I think we covered some pretty key topics there in depth. Looking at our notes here, we've gone over TifTuf, Sagrange, and even Primo Zoysia, which is a pretty new grass, and how they work in the sports turf market. Also some key things on how to look after them, keep them looking their best. So your expertise and your advice is always good, and thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. It's good fun. Cheers.